Hi, my name is Henry. I'm a 17-year-old who lives in a small town in the English county of Wiltshire, and I want to write comic books. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that my dream job is to write comic books professionally. My end goal is to make writing comic books my full-time job and be published by/work for major publishers like 2000 AD, Image, and the Big Two. If you haven't noticed, I'm basing this introduction off of the question line of who, what, where, why, how, which obviously brings us to the why section. I'll split this into why I want to write comic books and why this video series exists. Like many people, I got into comic books via Marvel and DC superheroes. My first exposure to superheroes was at the age of 5 when I was at a friend's house. He was watching Channel 4 and the Adam West Batman film was playing. From that point on, I was obsessed. I would eventually learn about other superheroes like Spider-Man and Superman, and this was 2011-2012, meaning we were heading towards the end of the MCU's first phase, which introduced me to Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, and Hulk. I would absorb as much information as possible about superheroes through character encyclopedias and lore books. However, actual comic books were never something I got massively into. I've always owned a couple books here and there, but as someone who didn't and still doesn't have a local comic book store, they were never something I had a lot of access to. At around the age of 10, I started getting into manga, which is obviously still an exposure to sequential art, and I'd often come up with ideas for manga series, but these concepts would never get past a cool idea, and in all honesty, I've forgotten all of them. I still enjoyed superheroes throughout this phase, but around the age of 15, a video popped up on my YouTube homepage, and it was Panda Red's compilation of Batman skits he made. I thought, screw it, I like Batman, so I watched and thoroughly enjoyed it, which, by the way, you should follow Panda on YouTube and TikTok because he makes great content. It was while watching this that I thought that I should try getting into comic books. It wasn't like I was starting from scratch because I already had prior knowledge of things like New 52 and Rebirth. I had a pre-existing collection, meaning I wasn't starting from nothing. So I dove in head first and fell in love. I remember one of the first books I bought after getting into comics was the first volume of New 52 Batman by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. And getting to the bit where you have to rotate the book as Batman spirals into badness blew my mind. Eventually I read Watchmen, and if Court of Owls blew my mind, Watchmen decimated it, and Alan Moore's formalism has been a big influence on my approach to writing. When I found myself involved in comic book discussion online, because my friends are boring Philistines, I would see people talk about creators' runs, and I thought I'd love to do that. I'd love to leave a legacy on a character that I love a lot, which is what inspired me to want to write comic books. Now, I didn't start right away. I started writing when I had completely organically come up with an idea for a story and thought, hey, that could be a cool idea for a comic book. I started writing it like a one-shot, but eventually realised that it would work better as an ongoing series, so look out for that in 15 years in the future. Now, why does this video series exist? I want to document my attempts at breaking into the industry, and I also want to use this as an excuse to regularly create content for this channel, because if this series proves successful, not only will I have a built-in audience for my books, but it also means I might be able to monetize not only the comics themselves, but also the creation of them. TLDR, I'm making the comics for the passion, and these videos for the money. This brings us to the final part of this intro, how. How am I going to break into the industry and become a professional comic book writer? Well, I've got a 34-page Google Doc of ideas, whether that be wholly original creator-owned books, or publisher-owned IPs like Marvel, DC, and even Doctor Who. I'd also like to add that the 34-page count is as of writing, because the document is ever-expanding. Now, my plan for now and the next couple of years is to work the webcomic scene. The next step after exhausting my ideas for webcomics and proving that I can write and make comics is that I'm going to start pitching books to independent publishers. The next step is to start getting work for hire gigs, and the final step would be to get a job at Marvel and DC. I acknowledge that this plan is probably going to take years, and the actual amount of time I spend before achieving the next step is going to be highly dependent on luck, but I optimistically feel that with enough patience and hard work, I can turn the odds in my favour. I have a lot of ideas for webcomics I plan on not only self-publishing, but also drawing myself. Art takes time, and time is money, meaning paying out of pocket for a complete comic book to be made is extremely expensive. Now luckily I have some level of artistic ability. There's still a lot of room for improvement, but I feel comfortable at my artistic level to start learning to make comics. So how am I going to learn how to make comic books? The obvious answer is to practice. Now, how am I going to practice? Well, I plan on making these little one-page comics based on several characters from my personal comic collection. To practice making comics, and if I'm happy with how they came out, I'll post them to my respective social media accounts, with the hopes of expanding my followers and, like these videos, my built-in audience. I do have an idea for a weekly webcomic, so if everything goes according to plan, I will start working on / posting it next year, so look out for that. However, before I can start working on these one-pages, the subreddit r/comic book collabs are running a competition for users to enter a 2-page story into an anthology. There's no prize for winning the competition other than street cred, but it sounds fun, and I will be taking part, he says, as the competition will be over before this video gets posted. Now, you might be thinking, hey Henry, you just said that you're going to make a bunch of one-page comics so you can learn how to make comics. Why are you jumping straight into a competition with a 2-page comics? And my response is, so the theme of the anthology was new beginnings. Having to write 2 pages on a certain theme felt like a challenge, but I found that once I had an idea, the rest all rolled out until I came up with the idea for Colony on Mars. The story is pretty simple, it's only a 2-pager after all. A family leaves a dying Earth to start anew on Mars. I wrote myself a script just because I enjoy the process, and the day before penciling I drew up some designs for the astronauts, the shuttle, as well as the family's faces for the Earth-based panel. I planned on penciling 1 page a day, but I managed to get both pages done in one sitting. I drew some thumbnails in my notebook, then in blue pencil I marked out the area where I'm going to be drawing the panels, as well as the constructions for the actual content of the panels. I then drew in the proper pencils and then lightbox the inks. I know a lot of artists choose to ink straight onto the pencils, but I lightbox my inks for a variety of reasons. First off, I don't have to deal with erasing the pencil lines, but it also means that if I make a big mistake I could just start over without tarnishing the original pencils. I then scanned in the inks so that I could colour them digitally. For those of you who don't know how digital colouring works, the first thing you do is adjust the brightness and contrast to make sure the lines are nice and sharp and the blacks are properly black. I then added a white background beneath the inks and made the white in the line art layer transparent so that the layer only contains the line art. I then used the lasso tool and the fill tool to block in the flat colours, hence why the process is known as flatting. Professional colorists will often outsource this job to other people to speed up the process, but I don't have that expendable income to hire someone to do that, so I did it myself. I returned to the colours the next day for the rendering. This is where I added the shading and a lot of the texturing. A couple of things I did was add some variance to the colours of Mars' surface. I used a second layer to colour on top of the line art. This allowed me to colour things like the smoke, the highlights on the visor, but also the red fog on the Martian horizon. The final step before submitting the page was to properly format it. While the organiser has stated that there's currently no intention of printing the anthology, they did state that they want the pages to be proper 7 by 10.5 inch format with bleeds. What this means is that if these pages were to be printed, everything in red will be cut off by the printer, everything in yellow might be, and everything in blue is completely safe. As stated before the 2-pager section, I will be making 1-page comics to practice the process of making comics. This gives me the chance to practice taking a prompt, in this case an entire character, writing it in a limited space, as well as the whole process of penciling, inking, colouring and lettering. Just like with the 2-pager, I drew out the layouts and constructions in blue pencil, then drew in the final line art with a mechanical pencil, lightboxed the inks, then flatted and rendered the page. So I've been kind of conflicted on what to title this series. In the intro, which at time of writing has already been written, recorded and edited, I called this series I Want to Write Comic Books, but I've realised while making this video that I haven't done a lot of writing. I focus on the general process of making comic books. Writing is the aspect of comic books that I most want to do and what I, out of my burgeoning comic creation skills, am best at, but I do enjoy all aspects of comic creation, and a lot of the steps I plan on taking to become a comic book writer will require me to do all aspects of comic creation. So I've decided halfway through writing, recording and editing this video to retitle it I Want to Make Comic Books. I tried to make these 1-pages to a schedule, but I didn't. However, these lazy days weren't entirely unproductive. I've been working on my art, and how I worked on my art was by pulling up examples from a lot of artists I really like, and looked at how they draw certain body parts, specifically eyes and torsos. I think, like I said in the intro, my art still has a lot of progress to make, but I think practicing these specific bits of anatomy has made my art noticeably increase in quality. So moving back to the 1-pager, not much about the process has changed. I did thumbnails in my notebook, starting in blue pencil, then moved to mechanical pencil, and once again lightbox the inks. Now, if you remember, I used Critter to set up the bleeds for Colony on Mars. Well, Critter is a dedicated art platform, meaning unlike GIMP, it has proper lettering tools. This was my first attempt at digital lettering. I had to follow a couple of tutorials on not just lettering in Critter, but also installing fonts, as I downloaded a font from Blambot. Blambot is the company owned by Nate Picos, who is a great letterer. He's worked on a bunch of Gerard Way's books. Blambot allows indie and non-profit creators to use their fonts for free, and if you're interested, I used Crimefighter. With Robin, not much has changed. If you noticed, in these last two comics I tried to use perspective grids. It didn't work perfectly, but that's one of many things that I need to work on. Not really much to say, as the process hasn't changed at all from Catwoman. So I'm going to use these outros to take a retrospective on the comics I've made throughout the videos. This month, the first one is Colony on Mars. I think I was able to communicate a decent story in such a limited space, though I felt that the one bit of dialogue was a bit forced. Penciling was okay. I think the shuttle looked passable, and I liked what I did with the horizon, but I think the designs for the astronauts kind of sucks. I like the inking I did, but I think this comic allowed me to delude myself into thinking I was a good inker. I really like the colouring, especially the colouring of Mars itself, and the lettering is kind of messy, but not in a good way. A lot of these one pages are extremely simple from a storytelling perspective. I think the Batman one page was fun. I like the perception of Batman as this supernatural cryptid. I think my anatomy and posing needs a lot of work, and I feel like I messed up a lot of the line weights. Colouring was okay, and the lettering ran into a lot of the same problems. Catwoman, I think I messed up a lot of the perspective, and I got kind of lazy with the backgrounds. I like the silhouette panel, it's kind of Miller-esque, but I fucked up the anatomy, especially with the head and fingers. I think with the final panel I messed up the shadow of the diamond, and I also made Selina's face too long. This not only made her face look weird, but also left her face with a lot of empty space. This meant when it came to colouring her face looked empty and flat, but trying to add to the face made it feel busy. I also tried to give her some eye makeup, but I think the blending makes it look bad. For Robin, once again the perspective is off. I got so fed up with drawing the second photo that I just didn't. I also felt that Robin's face felt empty, but once again didn't know what I could do to fill it out. I'm not massively happy with the inking. I found that if I moved slowly, my shaky hands would make the lines look messy, and more ink would run out than intended, but if I moved quickly I'd make mistakes and misrepresent otherwise good pencils. I thought the colours actually came out pretty well, especially the flats, and I will definitely be digitally lettering my comics from here on out. I mentioned at the start of this video that these one pages are going to be based on books from my personal collection, so if you're interested, this month's one pages were inspired by Batman Year 1 and Batman the Caped Crusader Volume 1. Now, while making this video, I saw a post on Comic Book Collabs asking for a scriptwriter, which is what gave me the idea to put together a portfolio. I've had a couple of scripts lying around, ranging from Future Shocks to 80-page graphic novels, so I put them into a Google Drive folder. I didn't get a response to my comments, so I assumed they went with someone else. I've left a link to the folder in the description. In there are a bunch of scripts like Future Shocks, short stories. There's a Batman one-shot, a Squirrel Girl one-shot, as well as a sample of an 80-page graphic novel. If you're an artist looking for scripts to practice with, feel free to use them. If you're a fellow writer, please don't steal them. And if you're an editor, hit me up. Next month I'm going to continue working on the one pages, but I'm also going to be working on hands, perspective, as well as my general inking technique. Thank you for watching. I hope you continue to follow me on this journey.